Hello and welcome to SonicLAB. Today we're looking at the Arturia Polybrute 12. Yeah, here it is. Isn't it beautiful? A big old polysynth from Arturia, their flagship in fact. Their previous flagship, the Polybrute Original, which was 6 voices, I reviewed and went in deep on the synthesis. This guy now has 12 voices and it also has some other stuff besides. But in terms of just the physicality of its thing, it's still a very impressive and large instrument. If we look at overhead, we can see essentially we've got this sort of extra depth, which is, this has got sort of venting. And the whole thing is convection cooled. There's no fans in this. It's a little bit further off the table. The feet are a bit bigger, so the whole thing is kind of just raised up a little to allow all that airflow, because there's so much circuitry in this. 12 analog voices with 2 oscillators per voice. These are exactly the same as you'll find on the original Polybrute. There's also then 2 filters, Steiner-Parker multimode filter and the ladder filter. Steiner-Parker is a bit more sort of angry and has got that sort of brute factor. Ladder filter is, well, it's a ladder filter. This one is slightly in that you don't have bass roll-off when you add resonance. It's got bass compensation. Then we've got 3 envelopes, VCF, VCA and a mod envelope, 3 LFOs, and then over this side there's also the motion recorder, which allows you to record a movement and then use that as a modulation source. And speaking of modulation source, we've then got the mod matrix. This is the sort of beating heart of the system because it allows you to easily route parameters in the matrix. We've got basically 4 pages of mod matrix and then we can just turn the amount positive and negative. It's a very elegant system, lovely. Same effects, modulation effects, delay effects, reverb effects. Then we've got the stereo width and of course the sequencer arpeggiator. Coming over this side, we've got the Morphing, which is also common to the Polybrute. And this is a little XY pad. You can see my finger is moving up and down, and that is positional data. So we've got left, right, up, down, and Z. So all of this adds to the expression. It's a very expressive synthesizer. I reviewed the Polybrute and I loved it. I thought it was a really good synthesizer, very well done. And it's also got this superpower, which is the morphing. Worth going over quickly if you've not seen this before. So starting with the morph control over to this side, we've got a basic init patch. I spin it over to this side and then what I've done is I've set up a different patch, because on this side I've just got the VCO1 in sawtooth going to open ladder filter. In the other side I've changed and I've added a bit of pulse width modulation, of course, why wouldn't you? So on this side, as I move over, it morphs to the other side of the patch. And pretty much any of the continually variable parameters, so the faders, the knobs, anything to do with that's basically knob based, can be stored in either side of the patch. So let's just do, well, if we go this side, we'll do a load of reverb on this as well. So I've got reverb on that side. So essentially the morph almost gives you 2 distinct patches. There are some that you can't change the effects types and things like that, but that morphing allows you to go between these 2 very distinct patches, even in that basic example. I hope you get the drift. And that is something that you can modify with the Morphing. So you can basically morph using this, or you can morph using envelopes or any other thing. So morph is a really big superpower, and that's one of the big selling points of the original Polybrute, and it's still here on this one too. Finally, we've got the ribbon controller, which is the same as on the Polybrute, just above the keybed. And also we've got this 61 key keybed, which is a new keybed for Arturia. They've custom designed it. It has polyphonic aftertouch and something called FullTouch, which we'll get into later. You can also see the colour. The colour's quite interesting, isn't it? It's sort of magnolia almost. Quite an interesting one to go for. It's not unattractive. It's just a sort of, when you think about it, it's magnolia. I'm sure it's probably got a much more arty name than that, but it's a very good looking instrument, isn't it? It really does sort of say, once again, look at my synth. So I think what I'll do is I'll play you through a few sounds so you get an idea of what's possible with this, and then we'll look at the FullTouch and the other things. I'm not going to do a full review of this instrument. If you want to see the synthesizer engine reviewed, I would totally recommend you just check out the Polybrute original review, because I go into great depth on that. So let's take a look at the various different modes of Aftertouch, because there's quite a big distinction between them. So at a basic level, I'm just going to go to mono Aftertouch, and we have this sound here. I've got the Aftertouch mapped to morph. So on this side of the patch, I've got this kind of sawtooth, and on this side I've got, using the second oscillator with a pulse width and a load of delay and various other stuff. So mono Aftertouch moves all of the notes at the same time. Okay, Poly Aftertouch, as you would expect, and this is where it gets kind of quite mind-blowing actually, because in Poly Aftertouch that morph will be on a per note basis. Really opens up a whole world of possibilities. As you can imagine, each note has its own trajectory through those patches, and this is just one example of a patch being on an A or a B side. That morphing feature allows us to do some really interesting stuff. Next mode is FullTouch, and the FullTouch is the new mode that the Arturia have cooked up. So if I come to this side here, and I'll just switch this off, what's happening is as soon as I touch the key, I'm beginning to open the VCA envelope. So the lightest of touches, I'm pressing, as soon as I just touch it the slightest amount, the VCA opens, continues to open until I get to sustain, take the pressure off, hit it hard, and I get a more staccato envelope, and then continue to press, and I get my Aftertouch. This is a really powerful expressive system, and it can be mapped in a couple of different ways. So if we look here, the envelope, the menus come up. FullTouch Aftertouch is to envelope to Aftertouch. That's very straightforward. We can set it so that it's FullTouch to Aftertouch only, so then that would be, in this instance, I'm basically using the full key drop from the very top to the bottom to modulate the entire Aftertouch amount. And then the Z mode, what that does in the mod matrix, that will now give me this expression Z, which I can then map to any of the mod destinations from the mod source. So there's different ways to set it up. Okay, short interlude. Who wants to hear 24 Oscillator Unison? I do. Okay, let's start with 2 sawtooths into both filters. We're just going to listen to the ladder filter to begin with, just straight in. It's got that that nice creamy black, which we can accentuate with the distortion. It adds some really nice smudge, about 65%. Just really works for me. Lovely. Anyway, let's now go into unison mode, and I've got it set up to be basically 12 voice unison for both sides. So also I didn't mention this has dual timbrality, so we've got split and layer here. So that's set up here, and we can set the unison for each one. So this is, that's very little detune between them. So if we now come back and we go to our synth voice, voicing, and unison detune, so that's 0 basically, or as close as it can get. And then I like this one. This is just really starts to, massive, isn't it? Now let's just try this knob here, because what makes a really big difference is adding the stereo width to those voices as well. So if we come back to this shot here and just turn this up, down the middle, goes out each side nicely. I've got a little sequence. Yeah, lovely. Anyway, let's get on to the Steiner-Parker filter. We can hear the difference between those two as well, which should be interesting. Take the sequencer off and the effects. It's got a bit more burn and sort of bring the resonance up. We take it through to the Steiner slope as well. Bring some of that brute factor, and you quite need a bit. It gets a bit screechy. Can't help but do filter mouth to that, can you? Anyway, that is 24 Oscillator Unison in a nutshell. So just coming back to the FullTouch, there's a couple more things that I just think are worth mentioning. So in this instance, I've got a very nice expressive, very simple tone. And in the settings, in keyboard, we've got curves. Now we've got curves for velocity and aftertouch, but nothing for FullTouch. Now, I was sort of concerned that perhaps there wasn't anything for the actual FullTouch, but in fact, the aftertouch curves will apply to the FullTouch. So if we just come back here, and I'll put this on, and you can see. So this, I've got this set to, the curve is now logarithmic, which means that the curve is effectively, if I come this way, it's effectively like this, or like this. So we have a curve that is getting to the sort of louder part quite quickly. I actually prefer, I think, anti-log, which is more rather confusingly like exponential. So logarithmic is like this, anti-log is like this. So you kind of start slowly and then build up and then gradually get to the end. So if I show you that, we're going. So I've just got a bit more control over that initial pressure. Same applies to the aftertouch part of it as well. So let's go to linear just to show you that. And linear is like a straight line. So it's literally, as soon as you touch it, stuff starts to happen, and then it goes in a straight line until you get to the end. There's no sort of graduality to any of parts of that curve. Now, another feature, I'll just go back to Analogue, which is the one I prefer. If I press and hold sustain, the sustain value holds the sort of maximum value of the key at that point. So if I then had sustain, so if I go here, put my sustain on and gradually take my finger off, it doesn't reduce the level, it holds it at the maximum pressure value. So if I do this and press sustain, it'll hold it wide open, whereas if I do this, it'll hold it there. And the only way to kind of reduce the volume of that is to sort of re-trigger it and play. And what I've got is the Aftertouch and the FullTouch is mapped to sort of filter opening and modulation. So it's and I've got quite a small amount there. So I'm using a lot of movement to create a smaller amount of timbre change, but it gives me a lot more control. So this brings me on to a feature request. It'd be lovely if this keyboard could have what I call sostenuto sustain. And that means that when you press, you have keys pressed and you hit the sustain pedal, it only sustains the notes that you had down when you press the sustain. Then you could just play over the top without the sustain being applied. So it'd be a bit like holding it like this. But as you can see, if I've got my foot on the sustain pedal, it just sustains everything. So I did actually put a request into Arturia and they said, oh yeah, that's a good idea. They may have been humouring me, but if it shows up, I'd like to take full credit for that, please. This one seems to have is It's a hard keyboard to review this, just purely because every time you touch it, you end up in the world, and that's a testament. I mean, again, they haven't changed much of the Polybrute because they got so much of that right that what they've added just makes it more. A couple of questions that came in. I'm going to go to some presets here. One thing that's key with Analogue Polysynth is tuning and calibration. I mean, it's a nightmare, basically. You know, there have been synths that have tried and they didn't get it right first time. So one question that came up in the comments was, what is the tuning and the calibration like? So here we go. This is 2 filters in resonance. So each time I press a note, I'm getting a new voice. And you can hear the consistency is pretty good across these. I mean, more than pretty good. I'd say it's spot on. So that's just playing the resonance of the Steiner filter. This is just the ladder filter. And also that filter tracking is pretty good. So So that's both filters now playing together. So I'd say, in terms of calibration, that's pretty good. It's worth mentioning, if we go to the settings and we go miscellaneous, we can voice auto-tune and we can calibrate. So going into here, we can calibrate the VCO and the VCF, and hitting those, if you hit all, it'll just do it. And yeah, you'll have to wait a little while it sorts it out. But I've found that I only did this once so far. I'm doing it again just to demonstrate, but I did this once and it feels like that calibration is pretty good. I mean, I have played some polysynths, no names mentioned, that are way off. We're talking quarter tones on some of those voices. Each consecutive key press, you end up with it being all sorts of wrong. But if you do want things to be wonky, settings, synth voice, voicing, analog accuracy will get you there. So if I go to pitch wild, you can hear each consecutive oscillator trigger, voice trigger. It's kind of much more variation in pitch, and I can go to others wild. So I can dial in. Back. That's much more accurate. So if you want that wonkiness, you can dial it in, although it doesn't go all that extreme. It could go further, in my opinion. Okay, I just wanted to go over the timbrality, because we do have the ability to split and layer the keybed based on two distinct sounds. Now, you may think that means complete patches. Actually, it's based on the morph. So in this single mode, I've got this sound running through the arpeggiator, and then on this side, I've got this sound. So if I now go into split mode and move the morph over to B completely, my split is as such. All well and good. Now, there's a little tip here which I didn't actually realise, and I want to say thanks to Sebastian at Arturia for showing me this. Basically, if we come back to the A side and I press and hold the timbrality and then shift to unison, you can see that now this is in unison mode. And I go back to there, so nice, that's all good. Now, what if I wanted to send this to the delay, but I want to send this to the reverb, which I can do on my A and B. Now, so what happens? No, now you can see that they all go to the reverb, and this is a little bit of a foible of the send effects. While if I was in single mode, I could go on one side send to one effect and on the other side send to the other. When you're in timbrality mode, those signals are summed, so they both go into the effect. So you can't actually have, you know, one being sent to one effect and the other sent to another. So it's a bit of a shame, but that's how the timbrality works on the Polybrute 12. It's not a kind of, it's a bit non-standard, but I'm not complaining too much because there's so much to like about this synthesizer, and it still allows you to have quite different tones on either side of the split or the layer. So what I'm going to do now is play a few more sound examples so you get a bit more of a sense of it. I'll put more of this on our Patreon, as indeed I think I'll post some actual samples of this for Decent Sampler, so do check that out. So what do I think about the new Polybrute 12? Well, I'm on record, I think, as saying that the original Polybrute was one of my favourite polyphonic synthesizers of the time. And the 12 doesn't disappoint. We've got just more of everything. And while we're on the subject of more, I just want to give a shout out to the Arturia engineers, because getting 24 oscillators and 24 filters calibrated and not going wonky is quite a mean feat. So hats off to you folks. Yeah, sure, it's a bunch of cash, but if you're the sort of person that likes to own big fat polysynths, then this has surely got to be on your list. I mean, it's a very impressive instrument. I mean, not only do we get all the sounds, but the playability and the expression, that FullTouch keybed really does open up a lot of extra synthesis. Okay, sure, 3,400 UK pounds, other currencies will scroll below, is a lot of money. If you can't afford that, then you can't afford that. But if you can, this synthesizer does actually represent a pretty good value, in my opinion. To get this much going on inside for that sort of price point is pretty impressive. Anyway, that's been SonicLAB Polybrute 12. Thanks very much for watching. See you next time.